for letting me take a quick break. So, Oldfield Succession is what we're going to do. Oldfield Succession is one type of succession. It's one model for succession. So let's go ahead and work a little bit with that. All right, in Oldfield Succession, what we do is recognize that we start with a group of species. This would be a kind of a community type, right, composed of a specific number of species, and that over time the community changes to a different community structure, different composition of species, to a different group, and maybe all the way up to group E. Each of these groups is called a seer. So we have seer A, seer B, seer C, seer D, and seer E. Now, even though this is the way we think about it, it's important to keep in mind that really what we're looking at are snapshots in time. That's probably not a good language to use with you, but this relates to cameras, where you take a picture, it's called a snapshot, that if with your phone you took a picture of the community, here's a picture at one time point, took another picture in 5 years, another picture in 10 years, that we would have these snapshots in time that are these seers. But keep in mind that the changing from seer A to seer B is not this boom, it happens. There's this gradual change that might be imperceptible and unnoticeable unless you looked at two snapshots in time separated by 5 years, at which point it would become very obvious that there were two different community types or two different seers. Okay? So in Oldfield Succession, we can actually start out in a couple of different places, but we're going to start out with the old field. So prior to it becoming an old field, it was plowed and used for agriculture, and now it's been left to go fallow. The soil is already there. All we've done is with the plow removed all of the species, and it's this big empty field just sitting there. Okay? Now, to move to our first seer, this would be seer A, what we need is a bunch of colonization. Right? We need a bunch of species to colonize this old field. Now, in reality, these seeds could have been there for 10 or 20 years. They just get plowed under every year. And now, since the plow didn't come in, maybe they've ended up at the top and they're going to germinate. Or it could be that they've blown in fresh. So in Jamie's old field here, some of these species that appeared in the first year could have been from colonization events in the past, or these seeds could have colonized in the fall of that year preceding 2010 when we went out and looked at this field. Okay? In any event, the species that are really good at colonizing these open habitats are collectively groups of plants that we would call weeds, right? They're really good at colonizing any kind of open space that shows up. These species are not very good at competition, so sometimes they would be referred to as these R-selected species. Remember R and K selection, species with short lifespan, produce lots and lots of offspring, low competitive ability, high dispersal ability. These species could also be called pioneer species because they're colonizing this unused habitat. And then another term that tends to be used for these species is ruderal. They're ruderal species. okay? Low competitive ability, very good colonizing ability. And it's not easy to colonize a bare field. I don't want to suggest that these species are somehow inferior because they're weeds. They're not. They're actually adapted to this kind of very, very difficult habitat to live in. Now, why would this habitat be difficult? Well, it's the bare ground just sitting there. A seed arrives, I put down some roots, and I put out some leaves and start soaking up the sun. Well, the sun is shining down on all of this ground, and what it's doing is increasing the temperature of this ground. It's right out in the sun, it's baking in the sun. And as the temperature of this ground goes up, what do you suppose happens to water availability in the soil? Well, it goes down because as the soil is heated, water makes the phase change, gains enough energy to leave and become water vapor. So these habitats, like abandoned fields, are very, very difficult habitats for plant species. It's hot, it's dry, there's no kind of respite from the sun. You have to just kind of sit there and take it. So these species that are coming in are also very good at living in habitats with not a lot of available soil moisture, and they get baked in the sun. Okay. All right, now, as these species begin to do their thing, you can imagine, right, a group of them over time. There were just a few of them, but they're starting to spread their seed everywhere, and as they do that, they begin to colonize any openings in this field. Okay? So they're colonizing these nice openings that exist within the field, and as they do that, the soil is no longer directly exposed to the light. There's some shading that's happening because these species are here. They're soaking up the sunlight before it can get down to the soil. So soil temperatures tend to drop, and water availability in the soil tends to increase. Okay? So as we make these changes to the soil environment due to the presence of these species, we're modifying the habitat in such a way that it makes it more favorable to a group of species that couldn't show up early on. They can only show up later after these initial species, the pioneers, have altered the environment. Decrease the temperature of the soil, increase soil moisture availability. So these species, like these early ones, are herbaceous, meaning they're non-woody, but they're more case-selected. They're much better at competition. Instead of putting their resources into surviving these nasty habitats, they put their resources into competition, which means they can't take these nasty habitats. But once the Sear A species have modified the habitat, these Sear B species can begin to move in. These species are also going to arrive through colonization, but they can only germinate when the habitat is more favorable. Now, once these Sear B species show up, they begin to outcompete the Sear A species. Okay? Now, over time, we're going to get some woody species that begin to move in. But these initial woody species that move in are more shrub-like, meaning multiple stems. Around here, these kind of shrubby species would be things like sumac or multiflora rose. They make wood, but the plant itself has multiple woody stems. this would all be one sumac plant, all connected underground, but there are multiple stems coming out of the ground, all belonging to the same genotype. Okay? So these woody plants begin to show up. They're much slower growing, but like these C or B plants, they require modifications. So we modified the soil to make it more favorable for C or B. These species are altering the chemistry of the soil through all of the interactions with soil bacteria and soil nutrients, making it more favorable for these woody plants. Now, once these woody plants show up, things are going to start to change faster, because this is now suitable habitat for a lot of animal species. So the plants that are woody like this offer refugia. A refugia is a place that an animal can hide from predation. So you can imagine rabbits or chipmunks or squirrels or birds, even ground nesting birds like chickadees, could live within this refugia as a way to hide from predators. Well, as these species show up, think about what the chipmunks are doing, right? They go out, collect a bunch of seeds in their mouth, carry them with their big cheeks poking out like that, and they carry them back and they store them, right, underground. So they're bringing in more species, seeds to this area. Think about what they eat. They like to eat oaks, right? They like to eat acorns. So they're bringing in oak seeds to this habitat. The birds, right, they're nesting in this place, but they go off, they fly someplace else, pick up some stuff, eat it, and then maybe when they're sitting here, they begin to drop it in the form of feces, and these seeds are in the feces. So they're bringing seeds from other places to this refugia. So you get other species being brought to where these shrubs are, and in that sense, the shrubs are helping to alter the habitat again by providing a mechanism for the introduction of lots of seeds. Okay? Now, these seeds that are being brought in are going to be some tree species. The difference between a tree and a shrub: a tree has one stem, the shrub has multiple stems. But the other difference too is shrubs don't tend to get as tall. The trees are much better at growing tall than the shrubs are. So eventually we're going to get some trees moving in. These trees collectively I would refer to as the softwoods. The softwoods, they like to germinate under some cover early on in life, but they also can handle full sun when they're seedlings. Around here, it's things like birches, aspen. These tree species have soft wood. You wouldn't want to make a house out of birch, right? It would fall over because the wood's pretty crappy. The wood is bad because it's very fast growing, which means the grain, if you did a cross section of the tree and you looked at the grain, you have all these big spaces between the yearling rings. It's full of lots of air, and it's easy to break. The wood is not very good wood. It's not very durable. It's not strong. It's not hard. It's a soft wood. Okay, now these trees are going to do to the shrubs what the shrubs did to all these herbaceous species. The shrubs are growing over the top of the herbs, shading them out so they don't get enough light. The tree eventually is going to start shading out this shrub, and then the shrub is going to be lost from the community because the trees can overtop it, overgrowth competition.